Hi everyone, and welcome to the program today, which is being filmed from Tbilisi in Georgia. And I'm very happy today to be joined by Mariam Lashkhi, who is a member of parliament and a representative of the Georgian Dream, which is of course the government in power, the political party in power. So welcome and thank you so much for coming. It's a great privilege to be able to speak with you.
Thank you, the pleasure is all mine. And welcome to Georgia, our fascinating country.
No, thank you. No, it's fascinating indeed. So, well, one of the purposes I wanted to talk to you was about, to get a better understanding for Georgia's foreign policy, but also its domestic issues. And I guess front and center is always the role of the NGOs, because, we call them NGOs, but if we're honest, they are financed by governments and they're often aligned with political interests of governments. And if one also goes into the literature, we also find that a lot of them have been, such as National Endowment for Democracy was indeed established by the CIA and Reagan for the purpose of having greater influence in the societies of other countries. So again, they also do good work, many of them, but it's always a problem if you outsource part of your civil society to foreign powers. So, so I want to explore a bit about how the NGOs work in this era of liberal hegemony in terms of attempting to align with what is often Western power interests as well as values. So, what is the role of the NGOs on Georgian culture or traditions or even its faith? Because the church here has a very important role in society. How do they all coincide?
Thank you very much for a very important question. And I'll start with acknowledging NGO's historical positive role in Georgian democracy development. But also we have to address the concerns, which are the recent trends, which is basically transforming NGO from its fundamental role of advocating for human rights to kind of a political activism, which we see not only in Georgia but also worldwide. And this is talked not only in Georgia but also recently in European Parliament. It was discussed that they are transforming the role of kind of polarization, contributing in polarization as well. But let's look at the facts, and the figures and numbers will be talking for themselves. In Georgia, we have 31,000 NGOs registered, out of which 97% receive funding from the international sources. And this is happening in 3.7 million population country. And we see what an unprecedented concentration we have per capita with regards to the NGO activities, which mainly are financed from the international sources. And then we see not only the rhetorics, but the concrete actions by the NGOs. And most active NGOs, which are linked to the concrete names of the opposition, who are sometimes either in the political party list, who either have been in governing in a previous regime, and they are also linked to concrete aggressive political propaganda. And we also had witnessed the propaganda such as throwing the Molotov cocktail to the police officers and so many others. And when we look at the NGOs, those are being financed by the international sources. Not only this, but also one of the most targeted institutions are not only the police or people in this power, but also church, which has been most reputable institution in the country, and with various opinion polls on annual basis, and we conduct this annual basis, we see that Georgian church, and specifically our patriarch, has most reputable position on those polls, and mainly he himself and also the church is attacked with systematic and with the simultaneous similar language attacks in order to attack the most reputable institution, and this is done by the organizations which are financed, as you mentioned, by the NED, EED, or Soros and others. So then you understand what is the sense behind all these figures and all these numbers, unfortunately. We also see another side is that we also see the NGOs who are run by the or they are in the names in the NGO list, which are usually political actors, and they are one of the most aggressive. So that's why we, as a governing party, have the responsibility towards our population to, on the one hand, understand who is standing behind what, and who is standing behind the actions which are not according to the rule. And in not only in Georgia, but in major democratic countries, we have the law, which is about party financing. So in order to avoid the rule, which is linked to, which is actually restricting the international actors to finance the political parties, in order to avoid this law, we see that these actions is being done through the NGOs.
And well, this is the problem. I think every country would see this as a challenge if you have this amount of financing coming in to represent the civil society. At what point does it become instruments for activism, also funded by foreign interest, not always with incentives that are only altruistic, only with the best intentions for Georgia, but of course being able to steer it in the desired direction. But how does that harmonize with, well, again, for example, the Orthodox Church here? Are they in tensions at times?
Well, mainly the major things with the local church and Orthodox Church is that because the reputation of the church itself is so high, and we also recently had 17th May, which is for the family values and for the Parents Respect Day, which was also established 11 years ago by Patriarch himself. We see what a number of population respects the day and what is the number of population who is respecting. So the polls can be seen by the people who went out for marching for the Family Values Day. On the other side, we see also and this day was established because by that time, not only the Patriarch but also our country decided that a major target for this type of aggressive actions are the families, are the church, and also and when you see similarities between those aggressive actors with even the wording and the systematic attacks towards the church, you will see. And our, as a government, responsibility in that regard was to clarify and let the people see who stands behind what action. And that was also the reason why we have initiated the transparency law. And the transparency law's core principle was to, first of all, in order to finance the organizations, you have to have also transparency, responsibility, and also accountability, which is one of the most democratic principles, accountability principle for the population. Well, we see that this labeling also is becoming a trend. Same for this law, it became the trend, and they have branded it as a Russian law, while it doesn't have to have anything to it, but this labeling is also an additional side about the empty labels to avoid any essential and real discussions on real matters in the politics. And this also shows the unresponsible and weak and lack of capabilities of opposition, because it became very easy to just use the labeling, empty labeling, without the essential discussions. And this becomes also cynic when either the law, persons, or the government is labeled as Russian or pro-Russian. In terms of, for instance, the most cynical was, and I thought that this reached to its peak when in Foreign Relations Committee we have introduced the resolution to support Ukraine. So Ukraine Solidarity Resolution, which was 2022, several days before the war started, when we were highlighting our solidarity, when we were highlighting about every sovereign country's choice of NATO and EU integration and so on and so forth. And this resolution was labeled by opposition as Russian resolution. So it was cynical, of course, but then this is bringing the emotions of population, and this is easy of raising people's emotions. Whenever you say this is a Russian law, people even do not start or discuss in details the law, but they already are labeling it. So this is cynical. This tactic, I would not say is not unique for Georgia, but also is not something new, which we have not seen in, for instance, in US in 1950s, 70s. But unfortunately, the guidebook is the same, so the methods are the same. The good part of it is that population and majority of the population are increasing their knowledge, increasing their awareness. They already know these same tactics, and that's why we received 54% of population support, because they on the one hand remember what was happening before. They judge based on the facts, and they do not just judge because of foreign-based directives, influence campaigns. And on the other side, very strong fact, Georgia's foreign policy is on EU and Western integration. This has been even constitutionalized by our party, and our Prime Minister, who is a constitutionalist, was himself the author of the article, which is requiring every institution to contribute in EU family integration. Not only this, but when you are labeled as pro-Russian, and then in your track record you have number of criminal courts, international courts, cases, when you have won the cases against Russia about the 2008 war. Especially when you are labeled by those parties who have signed the resolution and Taliavin resolution, where they were blaming our own soldiers of teasing the war. After all these facts, Georgian Dream was able to win the international case, so cases in international courts. We were also one who have submitted the Putin as a criminal to international human courts, and so on and so forth. So you have there the numbers, you have the figures and the factual actions, and then you see how cynical, and on the other side how disconnected the rhetoric is against the facts.
Well, when you say this, it doesn't sound as if it's only exclusive to Georgia, because we have a similar challenge in the rest of Europe. That is, you call them labels, or labels, concepts. They're quite interesting because they're very loaded, they're very powerful. If you say something is pro-Russian, but if you ask, well, but it doesn't. But you can fill it with any content you want. So if you, what I notice is whenever this concept or labels are used, it's intended to shut down any debate. So, for example, one can argue, as you mentioned, the conflict in Ukraine, that perhaps sending weapons and not talking to the Russians is not good for Ukraine. Perhaps this will only lead to their destruction. And then I always notice that always the same argument comes forward. Well, that's a Russian talking point, and that's it.
Or Kremlin's.
Yeah. So it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to mean. It appeals to the emotions, and it shuts down the debate. And it's a tool for censorship and smearing and cancellation. So it's very powerful. And but given that this is they say a Russian law, even though many countries ask for transparency, and again, ideally you would want to have, you can have some rational discussions about the need to find out which foreign powers are pumping what amount of money into NGOs and to do what kind of work. I mean, this is a very legitimate question to ask. So to dismiss it as simply a Russian law, so let's not talk about it anymore, it's quite efficient. But But this argument that, because I heard it here as well, that the government, they claim that it's pro-Russian, but as you said, the government has taken some measures which would be considered very anti-Russian in terms of what, as for example, supporting Putin's indictment, for example. So what is it that they put in the concept of pro-Russian? Well, what exactly would that mean here?
Like the label of pro-Russian concept itself, right? I mean, basically, Georgia is the country which is occupied by Russia. So 20% of our territory is occupied, and number one challenge for our country is the occupation. And this is also one of the first articles in our constitution. And when it comes to any integration or any enlargement or developing the institutions or security umbrellas, first of all, this is about our first and foremost challenge, which is the occupation, which is being the neighborhood with the imperialistic country, with whom we do have the pragmatic policy. And now our government is still considering that the war in 2008 could be avoided. Because this is a history. I mean, we did not appear in this neighborhood yesterday. We live in this situation centuries with all the occupation history what we're having from the imperialistic neighborhood. What we have chosen, and we are saying that in the framework and when being in the occupation period, and when being one of the first and foremost foreign policy of EU integration and NATO integration, this is the major thing to have our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And this is the foremost kind of goal of our country. On the other side, emotions, of course, in every country, and especially after Russia's invasion in Ukraine, word Russian itself and label itself became even worsened. But no one has to teach us who is an aggressor, because we were experiencing it for a long time. And even in 2008, when we had our own buchas in the Lashkhi Valley region, when we were raising the flag, by that time the Western goal was to restart and refresh relations with Russia. And they were considering that this is our bilateral relation. And even for us, it was really sudden that we were listening only deep concerns, but no real actions. And we were by that time saying that this is an imperialistic approach and this will not stop in Lashkhi Valley. So then we saw what happened in 2014. But most sudden story was that in 2009, after war, in 2010, we saw the majority of European flags on Red Square on 9th of May, standing on the march and celebrating. So, and then those, including Ukraine. And now Ukraine is telling us to, and teaching us who is aggressor. Sorry, but we know it, we've experienced, and we know how and who are standing with us. So that's why because based on the experience, based on the history, we and our government, through the wise and through very pragmatic policy, have chosen to, on the one hand, use this opportunity of being in a middle corridor and being a part of the multipolar world, to choose the free market economy on the one hand, to be pro-Georgian, first of all, and be oriented on our territorial integrity, sovereignty, include our foreign policy on EU integration, but as well as in terms of sovereignty and dignity instructions, and also with the international community, one of the major foreign policy parties, non-recognition policy. of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And this, and recently on UN resolution, we received historically high number of support in terms of internally displaced population, which was 107 countries' support in supporting Georgia's territorial integrity and sovereignty spirit. So in terms of all this, we know that even in European family, Europe needs a strong, economically viable and unique, diversified country in the family. And that's why we're saying that by 2030, we will do our best in terms of fulfilling all the requirements, association agreement, concrete steps, the roadmaps, which will bring us in terms of institutional development and democratic development through the rule of law and all the human rights reforms, also with the economically strong country to the family. And we also have this free market economy with the free trade agreements with 1/3 of the world, because we truly believe that we have to utilize this middle corridor opportunity and free market economy in order to strengthen our economy and strengthen and have the sustainable development from social and economic perspective.
When you said you want to be pro-Georgian, it reminded me a little bit about Hungary, because Prime Minister Viktor Orban there, he always makes the point, this is not pro-West, pro-Russia, this is about being, putting their own country first, and there's some pragmatism there. And they also face the same arguments then. Well, then they say, well, this is pro-Russian, which is, again, this emotional sloganeering to avoid any sensible discussion. But I don't know, it was just an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
But your Prime Minister, he made the point more than once that he feared that the NGOs have been activated to become much more aggressive in order to topple the government, because interest in the West, he referred then specifically to the United States, that they had an interest in toppling the government here, so they can use the Georgians as a second front against Russia. Do you share this idea, or how do you assess it, at least?
This is not a conspiracy,
no.
And these are the facts. And we have to look at the concrete facts in recent history. If we look at the Georgia and Western world relations, and if we look when it become tense, we have to look at 2022, after the war in Ukraine, when we had strong and very intense pressure on, first of all, for instance, introducing the bilateral sanctions to Russia. Well, I have to highlight here that Georgia is part of every multilateral sanction platform, and even though we had 2 months propaganda by all those aggressive NGOs that Georgia is used as a kind of avoiding sanctions and helping Russia for avoiding the sanction circumvention, we had invited the highest level envoys from UK, US and European Union, the sanction envoys, who have conducted thorough assessment, and they said that there is not a single case of sanction circumvention, even though Georgia is doing even way more. And it was stated from O'Brien's last statement on press briefing, when he was highlighting how Georgia is doing well with the international sanction platform. On the other side, we knew that the bilateral sanctions will never harm Russia, because our portion in their economic basket is 0.2%, while on the other side it's around 12%. And we knew that this will not be harming Russia at all. It will be just a teaser for attracting and removing their attention to Georgia and teasing the war situation. Even not only this, but there was a high pressure on sending the volunteers by the government airplane to Ukraine. And this was, I mean, every volunteer who wanted to go there and fight were open to go and fight, and there are Georgians who are sacrificing their lives there, and we all kind of value it, but it's like when you are doing it through the government airplane and sending the volunteers, mobilizing those, this is not just a voluntary action, this is the flag to Russia in order to have kind of teased the actions to military actions.
It's an act of war, yeah.
Absolutely, direct second front. Not only this, also we had the official statements, for instance, from Ukrainian government, high-level officials who were saying that now it's time for Georgians to go and walk inside the Abkhazia, which was again another kind of pressure on us to try to have the war. I'm not talking about the closed-door meetings where me personally I was attending because this was closed-door meetings, but now they talk even about this even louder, even on international communities, that Georgia's uniqueness is the mountainous country which is giving the opportunity for the partisan war. So this could extend the timing, and even for that cases, I mean, our argument, our officials' argument for that cases, for the high-level officials from the embassies, we were saying that even this is not a wise decision, that Russia will need few days, 5-7 days, in order to kind of come into the country and have the full defeat, because as you might be well aware, from like the most important and the from the highway, from Georgian highway, you can even see the soldiers in administrative borderline. So this is just crossing the 30 kilometers towards to close the east-west connection highway. So even this argument for them was that you are kind of heroic people, you are for fighting, you have the historical role, and also that you have this mountainous region. This will give you an opportunity for the partisan war. So this was, I mean, directly putting us into the second front, which for that, according to history, according to all the people's comment to Georgian government, we said no. And all these triggers were the main triggers of having the tense relations with Russia. And years before, when we were conducting this reform, were the front runners in European family contributors, reformers and preformers. But after all this, all of a sudden we became pro-Russian because we were having our people's interest guarded, like we were guardians of our people's interest, and that was the main point of their. So this is not a rhetoric or conspiracy theory that someone was putting us to war. It was direct actions, direct statements from the high-level officials.
Yeah, and it can be added that no one is denying this either on the Western side, that they want this. But no, I'm glad that the government opposed this. I mean, well, just walking around the streets there, would, to have all the young men, studying, working, establishing families instead of going into the trenches. It's sad that would be also falling under the category of being pro-Russian in terms of not sacrificing your youth. So it did remind me a bit about an article though written by George Soros, since he's one of the main financiers of a lot of the NGOs, and he wrote in 1993, he advocated for more NATO-centric world order, and he argued that NATO should have more partnerships with the Eastern Europeans, because for NATO they have the technical capabilities, but it would not, there's no willingness to accept a large amount of body bags. Mm-hmm. This is what he wrote, and that's why we need to partner with the Eastern Europeans, so they can send their men and will use our equipment, which is a very cynical way of looking at the world and the role of warfare, of course. But well, one of the reasons why I'm here, at least, as well as other my colleagues from Europe and the United States, is We attended a conference, which you were as well, on the topic of how do small countries survive and thrive. Georgia, of course, I think is often an ideal example. You're here next to Turkey, next to Russia, Iran's not that far away, and not only are you surviving, but you're also thriving in a big way. To be honest, I was a bit ignorant about the increase in the GDP here, and it's quite remarkable. But what is your perspective on this, though? How does a small country have security and survive among the great powers, especially in these days when we are shifting more away from the hegemonic era?
Very interesting, very interesting, and very big analytical work. But a short answer to it is the peace as a precondition for economic prosperity. And when we say peace, we mean it. And when you were mentioning the statement from Soros as well, we were one of the major contributors to NATO peaceful missions. Per capita, we were the largest who were contributing our people there who were fighting. So when we were saying commitments, we meant it, and we sacrificed for these commitments. On the other side, we are saying that the peace, without peace, you cannot maintain and you cannot sustain as a country. So this is essential and substantive questions of your existence. With peace, we have brilliant relations with Turkey. We have excellent trade relations, which is on annual basis is increasing, as well as on political level. We have multilateral and trilateral relations together with Azerbaijan on both executive and parliamentary level, where we see that strong neighborhood, strong region is ensuring the prosperity. On the other side, we have been peaceful facilitators, dialogue facilitators between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And Georgia was the only place where the Prime Minister of Armenia and Prime Minister of Azerbaijan talked and discussed about the peaceful discussion. They also consider Georgia not as a big boy sitting on the table, but Georgia as a regional player to facilitate this peaceful dialogue, and both of them acknowledge our role and they appreciate it. And we also talk about this trilateral platform, and just recently we had the ministers of foreign affairs in Georgia. So this is also being a Georgia as a ensuring the peace in the region, because without it we cannot talk about economic growth, we cannot talk about the trade. On the other side, we have this very direct economic development strategy, which is based on free trade agreements, free market economy development. Georgia always being in this geopolitical situation, we have been connector of civilizations. We have been part of the Silk Road to any other routes which was relating and connecting Europe to Asia. And by the way, my PhD thesis is all about the digital Silk Road development, so bringing on those routes and expanding these relations. And on the other side, we have the free trade agreements with 1/3 of the world. Just recently and very quickly we have finalized with the United Arab Emirates. We have free trade agreement with, of course, European Union, the DCFTA, and we're a unique country because at the same time we have free trade agreement with China, which is also one of our strategic partners through the economic development. If you look at the strategic partner countries, we have slightly different agreements with European Union member countries and China, which is mainly oriented on purely economic activities. And on the other side, Georgia was always a strategic connector, and we also look at the strategic economically viable projects, such as, for instance, BP pipeline. With UK, we did it like years ago, but this was also kind of a supportive and guarantor of our peace in our territory. On the other side, we are now finalizing the discussion about Anaklia deep sea port, which will be another big project which will be connecting Europe to Asia. We are also having the undersea cable project, which will be alternative energy source for Europe from Central Asia. So Georgia is using the opportunity and transforming the challenge of multipolar world and utilizing from this opportunity in order to, on the one hand, not to be dependent to the one polar world, and on the other side, diversifying its markets.
Yes, an interesting, because often when people talk about multipolarity, at least in the West now, it often comes with negative connotations. That is, it's only seen as a challenge. But if you see in the ancient Silk Road, a lot of the regions who thrived a lot were the ones who were able to take advantage of this connectivity. So I guess a country like Georgia that unites the West with East and North with South, it can prosper if it takes proper advantage. But so China has become a key partner in this.
Absolutely.
But in this connectivity, one can't look away from the main largest neighbor you have, which are the Russians. So at some, of course, this government has been attempted, from what I understand at least, to be more pragmatic in terms of well, recognizing that the neighbor is there. And but how are there any efforts being made to normalize relations? Because the problem with smearing it always as being pro-Russian is, again, if the goal is to be pro-Georgian, the point of departure is how can we enhance Georgia's interest? Surely there must be an interest in restoring some economic connectivity and simply for the prosperity of Georgia, but also politically, because if you make the giant up north feel nervous, that's not great for Georgia. So again, if the main focus is on what is good for Georgia, how do you, what can be done to, I guess, normalize relations with Russia, again, to the extent it's good for this country, not doing any favors to others, but it will have a lot of internal opposition, I would assume. But is anything being done, and well, what are the hurdles? Yeah,
well, the status quo is that we have the occupation and we have no diplomatic relations. Actually, Georgia was, I guess, one from very few who has no diplomatic relations with Russia, and the second one after Japan,
who is for pro-Russian government. Sorry for interrupting.
And Georgia is one together with Japan, who is not having any peaceful resolution with Russia. Well, the status quo is that there is no diplomatic relations. The only relations which we are having with Russia is economic and trade, which again we are trying to not be dependent on Russian market, because it's not avoiding the direct neighbor who always has been one of the major trade partners, but it always has been not reliable because we were having in the history of closing the border all of a sudden, or having the kind of for our wines and the sparkle water, sometimes we had a ban. So it's not a reliable market according to the history, and that's why we had the choice of diversifying the market for our trade and entrepreneurs. That's why we have these free trade agreements with other worlds in order to not to be dependent on that market. But on the other side, theoretically, we know that every conflict has to have the resolution with the dialogue, and the only dialogue platform currently what we're having is the Venice, in Geneva we have the dialogue platform, which I wouldn't say that there is any progress after it. I mean, we have been experiencing, and we tried several tools and instruments for it, but unfortunately, currently, I do not see any light in this tunnel. but we're very optimistic. We know that the first and foremost, the resolution of the conflict is not teasing the war. So that's his very direct answer, and we will try our best and everything in order to avoid the war. But on the other side, I mean, we're open for any deoccupation activities which is there. So our precondition and red line is deoccupation. And after deoccupation, we can start from the white paper, so to say. Because for now, Russia is an occupant of our country. And if there is no other status of it, we will talk then with the neighbors.
Yeah, well, on the diversification, I always argue in favor of this. Being too dependent on one neighbor is rarely a good idea. And on the other hand, some connectivity is obviously good. I was actually introduced to Georgian wines first time I saw it when I was living in Russia, so that's where I saw it. So it's still a good market. But but again, speaking to the neighbor though, there's no willingness to even talk to the Russians until the territorial issues have been solved.
We have this platform in Geneva.
Yeah.
So where we have the facilitators in Geneva about this dialogue. This is the only platform where we have any communication on the political level. And let's see, if there is a will, if there is a readiness, there can be the platforms, the existing platform can be utilized in order to solve this issue, or any other platforms. But first of all, in order to resume the bilateral political and diplomatic relations, the red line is the occupation.
And what is the relations with NATO though? Because recently General Keith Kellogg was envoy for Donald Trump in Ukraine. Or negotiating with the Russians as well. He made the point that the Russians had legitimate concerns about NATO expanding towards their borders, effectively recognizing that this was part of the source of the war. And but he said so a solution wouldn't only have to apply to Ukraine, but also other countries. So he referred to Moldova as well as Georgia, that this is something like a final settlement we have to take into consideration, that we can't do necessarily what we did in the past. Has this affected the way Georgia approaches NATO, or how do you define the relationship now?
For us, NATO, and we were very serious about NATO integration in terms of the constitutional article, in terms of all the requirement fulfillment and alignment of NATO requirements when it comes to starting from using the budget, allocating the certain percentage from budget for the military activities, in terms of contributing our soldiers to the NATO missions, and so on and so forth. On the other side, we see that from Bucharest Summit in 2008, nothing really has changed. I mean, in 2008, we received the promise, we received this virtual open door, but we are standing in this open door for a long time. People, even in society, there is a joke that we might catch a cold in being in between the two open doors of NATO and EU. But on the other side, when it comes to EU integration, we know that we have still the reforms to conduct in order to fully align our institutions, our requirements to EU integration. But in terms of NATO integration, this is about a political decision. And we have the history just recently that through the political decision, how fast Finland and Sweden became members of NATO. And Finland, who is also sharing the border with Russia. So it's not about the procedures, or sometimes they say it's about the occupation and so on. So there are always reasons finding in order to avoid Georgia of becoming the NATO. One of the arguments to our NATO colleagues and NATO member countries is that currently we have pretty high perceptions in our society positively towards EU and NATO, even if to compare to Moldova, this is half-half. So they had referendum of EU integration, and it was almost like a half perceptions. While it's not in Georgia, but just recently there was a Gorby poll which showed that there was a pretty big decrease in these perceptions towards European integration. And we're saying that if our population does not only sees the steps from our side and doesn't see the steps from the second side, the perceptions will be decreasing. And this is something which is worrying us as a government, because we have done a lot in order to keep these perceptions, even though we recently had unfairness in terms of giving the candidate status 1 year and a half belated comparing to Ukraine and Moldova, while in terms of figures and requirements, Georgia was ahead based on their even own assessments. So there are the unfairness perceptions as well, and these perceptions might be decreasing, which is pretty important to take the attention to. From our side, we still today see that NATO is only guarantor and only umbrella for our security. But then we see also that the whole geopolitical situation is being transformed. We do not see what will be the budget support from US as well to NATO. So we are currently in, so to say, looking at what's happening in the world, fulfilling our requirements and our agenda, acting in the interest of our population. And by 2030, as it was Prime Minister's statement, we do not want any instrument of integration to be used as a manipulation for manipulating the government of any actions. We are removing it from agenda, but we are having all the requirements and fulfillment by 2030. So by 2030, we will see, and we committed that we will be one of the most ready country for EU integration. Same with the NATO integration, and we will see what will be the status quo by both and what will be their readiness for expansion, because this is a very legitimate question which is raised by even by the members, whether NATO or the EU is ready for the expansion.
Yeah, yes, I almost forgot, it's been 17 years now since 2008. However, if you look towards Turkey, how long they waited for the EU membership, yeah, that's much longer. So it does beg the question if it's not in the cards. The EU membership might of course be easier to pull off, given that Georgia is a smaller country, easier to absorb and with fewer consequences. But
we have to use it as an instrument. So it's like, and I was with so many, like some of the youngsters, I was negatively assessed with my statement that EU and NATO integration is not the main goal. The main goal is your country's economic security, economic and social security. And NATO and EU integration is a tool and instrument which will be ensuring that main goal. Because we have instrumentalized, we have majority of the youth, not only youth but also others, have taken this as a key goal of the instrument. This was, I think, the major mistake. So our country's major goal is to have secured, economically and socially sustainable country with territorial integrity and sovereignty. And with this, we see currently that the main instruments for ensuring it is EU integration and NATO integration.
What I heard once in a conference in Russia, though, was because NATO doesn't take in countries with territorial disputes, so it creates it does create an incentive not to solve the issue of occupation, given that as long as this is under Russian control, then they can't be absorbed into NATO, and the Russians, they say this is an existential threat to us. So it kind of freezes the situation in the world.
Well, this is again political decision, because if there was the same sense, we would not be part of any union, including UN or any other union. If this is because, for instance, we are part of European Union. Oh, sorry, hopefully soon, but United Nations, and in United Nations is covering the administrative part of Georgia, yet. And it's like Article 5 with NATO can be excluded for these territorial issues, but we could be part of it. So territorial issue is not, of course, I mean, we want to become part of NATO because we want the security and we want territorial integrity and sovereignty. And that could be done through joining, similar to the procedures which is the same with other union memberships. And then when we will be finalizing this issue, bilaterally, multilaterally, then they can cover the whole territory.
I guess my point on it, wouldn't the lesson be from Ukraine that it wouldn't lead to security? Again, well, it would be, if it looked like Georgia would enter NATO, that this would be something that would trigger a military response on the Russian side. If security is the end goal, how certain is the government that NATO would be the path towards this end?
So my point when saying that for us NATO is an instrument for ensuring security and sovereignty relies on the same. So if we have to sacrifice anything, even one person's life, we do not consider that this instrument is there.
Okay, that makes sense. My last question, though, is only on the economics issue. As I said before, ignorant perhaps, but I didn't know about this incredible economic growth that Georgia has. I guess what is the secret recipe, or how do you explain this economic success?
Yeah, so basically the economic growth in Georgia after COVID was 2 digits, and we remained it from 5 and above, like 4% and above. So we had in 2024 9.7% GDP growth. Currently, the first quarter we have 5.7%, and even IMF is expanding its initial forecast. And this main instrument for it again was the peace and pragmatic policy, the free trade agreement, and the tourism is also having a big portion in our basket. So mainly this is the short answer to it is that Georgia is very much oriented on diversifying the market and having the having the reforms in order to have ease of doing business in Georgia, in terms of having the almost zero corruption on the institutional level, is also having the attraction for investors to invest in Georgia. Recently, we also signed the 6 billion investment with the MR, with the UAE, and also other upcoming projects which we are saying. We also consider that Anaklia Deep Seaport project will also have a big run into that figures. So this is mainly for businesses to have peaceful and strong, like government who is very strong in terms of securing the peace in the country, because if you are an investor if you do business, when you do not know what will be happening with the country, whether there will be war or not, you are not spending, you are not investing. So government is ensuring the business sector that they will be in a secured situation. We also have reforms where the doing business with avoiding the bureaucracy, with all the opportunities which we are having, is enhancing the opportunities. Of course, the tourism attraction, the investments, but as a precondition, peace is always there. So the key part in this formula is peace and reforms in simplifying the business procedures in Georgia.
Okay, well, that's the secret recipe. I talked to many Georgians who were frustrated by the reputation that Georgia has, especially in a lot of Western countries, and I'm also a bit perplexed because if you look at the state of democracy, the development, corruption, and economy, it's doing really well. So it does perplex me, the I guess unjust reputation that it seems to be assigned. So anyways, I think I already taken too much of your
disconnect
time.
between rhetoric and the factual action. So those people who, of course, we are in the world of perceptions, but the people who are focused on the real work, they look at the real figures, they look at the international rankings, including in open governance, including the budget openness and so on and so forth, where in all the democratic principle criteria, Georgia is having huge increase. So when you look at the facts, not the perceptions raised by kind of populistic political activism, then you do invest, you do the business, and that's how we prosper.
Yeah. Well, no, it's quite interesting to see all around Tbilisi how it actually looks like. So
characteristic as well. I know if you, for the international tourist, one of the major parts you noticed in Old Town, you see the mother of Georgia standing, who was built this in 15,000 years of anniversary.
On top of the hill.
On top of the hill, who is having the bowl of wine in her right hand for the friends and the sword for the enemies. And this is also characteristic of Georgia in terms of hospitality, dignity, and be very principled and pragmatic in terms of enemies.
That's a great position to have. So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. So, thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.